You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast, episode number 43. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news, and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Music Tech Teacher Podcast. I'm Katie Wardrobe from midnightmusic.com.au, where I help music teachers use technology effectively in music education. First of all, I want to wish everybody a very happy new year. I hope that wherever you are, you've had a relaxing holiday season and some time with family and friends. Here in Australia, we're in the middle of our summer holidays, so our school year finished up in late December and doesn't go back until the beginning of February. So this is our long extended summer break. So far, I've been really enjoying the warm weather, except perhaps yesterday where it was 41 degrees Celsius. So that was a bit too hot, but it's been really nice. And I've had some time to spend, a little bit of time on the beach, and that's been really lovely. I've also been preparing to run my first ultra marathon trail running event, which is taking place in mid-January. And the run is a total of 56 kilometres. I'm almost too scared to say that out loud, but it's on one of my absolute favourite trails here in Victoria where I live, and it's called the Two Bays Track. So if you look it up on Google Maps, you should see it there. It stretches across our Mornington Peninsula, and the track has beautiful scenery. It's quintessentially Australian bushland in some sections, and then other parts are a bit more tropical looking with lots of giant ferns, and then there's sections which go along a cliff top which overlook a beautiful bay with lots of kangaroos and echidna and even some snakes. Yep. And it's, in fact, during the race, it's compulsory to carry a snake bandage with you, just in case. So touch wood, I haven't seen any snakes myself on the track, but lots of people I know have. So that's coming up for me. I hope that you've also been having a great holiday period, summer for you if you're in the southern hemisphere like me, but perhaps a winter break if you're in the northern hemisphere. Now, being caught up with all the end of school year events and Christmas and New Year and everything else has meant that this podcast episode was delayed a lot more than I had hoped. Today's episode is the second part of a two-part series called 22 Ways to Use GarageBand or Soundtrap in Music Education. Now, if you haven't listened already to the first part, I would highly recommend listening to that one first. I covered some general tips for working with either of those software programs, and I also shared some easy lesson ideas and some sort of moving on lesson ideas as well. Today's episode, I'm going to cover more intermediate ideas and some advanced lesson plans too. Now, if you'd like to download a list of all the lesson ideas that I'm going to mention during this episode and also the ones from the previous episode, you can head to midnightmusic.com.au/43. There'll also be a link on that page to the first episode in case you want to go back and listen to that one. I hope I didn't keep you in suspense too long if you have already listened to the first episode and you've been waiting for this one, and I hope that you enjoy it. Now, some level 3 intermediate type project ideas. One of the things that I love to do is create a cover song version of something that you know. Now, you can go about this a couple of ways, and, some people actually have said to me, why bother doing this in the first place? I think there's a number of reasons why it can be useful to create a cover song of something you know. The approaches that you can take are to either replicate the original one. Now, this can be really good from a listening skill development point of view. I don't know if you've ever tried to do this, but if you even try to replicate the exact drum part of just one song that you hear on the radio, perhaps a top 40 song, it can be a really interesting project to try and identify the same snare sound that's used in the song and try and find the matching sound in GarageBand or Soundtrap. You're not always going to find, and in fact it's very unlikely that you will find an exact match, but to even try and get it close is a really interesting exercise. So I find myself listening, I'll lay down the rhythmically correct pattern for the drum beat that matches the pop song, but it can sound so different to the original that you can start to get annoyed. So I start listening to, the snare's not quite like that. You know, on the recording, it's more of a dead thud kind of sound. And the one I've got, it's got too much reverb on it because that's what's in the library that I'm using. And I'll go and look through all the other options and see if I can get one that's close. Now, in my point of view, that can be a really good listening exercise because you can get very granular listening to very specific parts of a song and trying to recreate them. If you're going to get students to do that, it can be useful just to choose one section of a song, just the chorus or just a verse, or even just the opening, kind of riff, intro, hook type part. Just choose one section of the song and get them to recreate that. It's a great listening exercise from, within one specific track, but it's also great to have them listen to all of the parts that they can hear. Can they hear the bass line? Can they listen to that and work out what the bass is doing at that point in the song? And can they hear what the guitar's doing? Is the guitar actually playing through the whole chorus? Maybe they drop out at some point. Or is there a keyboard part? Or what is that thing that's making this sound at this point in time? It's a really great listening exercise, and it's something that I actually do when I'm just driving around in the car. Is I listen to songs in that type of way where I'm picking out the different parts in the backing and just seeing if I can remember them or learn them or imitate them in some way. And then if you are going to go down and record later on, it's a lot quicker if you've done a lot of listening to it in the first place. So that's one approach to doing cover songs, is to recreate the original and then maybe get students to sing their own version over the top. The other approach, which I also really love, and perhaps love this a bit more, is to create an arrangement of the song which is quite different to the original. I love, and I think a lot of people love, hearing examples of arrangements of songs that are so vastly different to the original that it changes the feeling or the meaning of the song. I don't know if you've seen recently, but what are they called? Aha, who sang Take On Me. This is a song from my teen years. They recently did, I'm presuming it was recently, did a live performance, kind of like an acoustic performance. And they did the song Aha. And sorry, I'm getting mixed up with the band and the song. They did the song Take On Me in this acoustic style. And it was so vastly different to their original version. It's really quite beautiful. I'll link to that in the show notes because if you haven't heard it, it's totally worth a listen. And it's now on rotation in one of my playlists on Spotify because I really liked it so much. So playing students, different versions of the same song can be a really great exercise in comparing arrangements and in talking about the skills that arrangers have and what are all the things, musical things, that an arranger can change to make a song sound quite different. So one might be taking away the drum backing. Another thing they might do is they might change the key. They might make the song faster or slower. They might change the instrumentation completely. There's lots of different ways that you can do this, and there are some great listening examples. In my online community, I actually made a quick lesson called Better Than the Original, and it's a listening lesson where you can pick two contrasting versions of the same song, and it can be anything, it doesn't have to be anything specific. And then there's a worksheet that you can use with the students where they compare different musical aspects of the two versions and work out exactly what it is that's different and what changes the feeling or mood. Lots and lots of great examples on YouTube of things like that. So when students are creating their own cover version of a song, you might again get them to just choose one section of the song, just the chorus, just the verse, and get them to create their own version where it's totally different style. They might create a country version of some kind of classical piece even. They might do a ballad style version of something which was originally like a really heavy rock piece. And it's just a lot of fun to do that. I really like that exercise. Great fun. Now, along the same lines, moving on from cover songs is, of course, to get students songwriting themselves. And again, there's a couple of ways you can approach this. If they're just starting out with songwriting, you might not just want to go, say to them, go to GarageBand and write your own song. That's really overwhelming. I would find that totally overwhelming. To provide some kind of parameters or limitations for the students is an easier way to start. So one thing that I've found works really well is to choose a chord sequence that everybody does, and everybody uses the same chord sequence, but they can make their own backing, their own song in any style, using any instruments they like, and just having that chord sequence there as a foundation can be a nice starting point. So one that you can do is that 4-chord sequence that lots of us have used with the Axis of Awesome film clip. I know most of you will know what I'm talking about. Again, I'll link to that in the show notes as well. But the Axis of Awesome are a band, and they put together a medley in a comedy show, actually, kind of proving that so many pop songs have the 1, 5, 6, 4. Did I say that the right way around? 1, 5, 4, 6, 1, 5, 6, 4 chord sequence. Anyway, you know the one that I mean. And there are so many songs which use this same chord sequence. So you could get students to listen to that first of all, listen to some songs that they know with that chord sequence, and then they might record that chord sequence. They can choose their own tempo, they can choose an instrument, and they can choose, how they're going to play those chords, and record them just for 8 bars, maybe twice through. And then the next stage might be that they're going to write an original melody over the top of that with lyrics to go with it. And that's a nice, short, self-contained songwriting exercise where they've made something original of their own. Of course, after that, you can move on to more free options for songwriting, and a collaborative songwriting project can be a really, really good idea. So this might be where you have students working in groups, and they might be in groups of 3 or 4 where they're all collaborating together on a songwriting project. And again, deciding a chord sequence, or perhaps someone writes the lyrics first of all, someone else puts a melody to that, and someone else works out some chords to go with that. Again, having some parameters in place works really well and can help the creative process, but that's a great way to do things. Now, in Soundtrap, Soundtrap has the benefit, because it's an online tool, it's really easy to collaborate within Soundtrap. 2 students can even kind of work on the same project at the same time and be on separate machines, separate computers. So that's a great thing for Soundtrap. Students can also collaborate when they're not in each other's presence with Soundtrap. So if they can both log in from perhaps their own homes, if they're doing this for homework, for instance, and log in and use Soundtrap together in that way. So that's a great thing. Soundtrap also makes it super easy to send files to one another. You basically allow someone access to log into that file. It's not like you're sending a physical file via email. It just makes it a much easier process. So collaborative songwriting is a great one. With GarageBand, I've seen some teachers do that collaboration in that way. So maybe there's a small group working on a single song. I've also seen some teachers do collaboration in a slightly different way, where a group or maybe a pair of students might start a song off on one computer, and then a couple more students come along later on and add something to that composition or change something about that composition. So they might add the next section, or they might add a bass line to what's already been created there. There's a teacher here in Australia, Anthony Hubmeyer, and he's done this as a kind of a musical chairs composition project, and that's a great idea too, where students are moving around the classroom, switching over to the next laptop and adding something to the composition there. So that's just another way of approaching collaboration. Now, in the level 2 kind of projects, we talked about doing nursery rhymes uncut, or narrating a story or poem and adding sound effects to go with it. The next level up of that could be a slightly larger project, and it might be something like a radio show. Really, the tech skills are exactly the same. Students are going to record some kind of narration or speaking. Then they're going to add some sound effects and some music as well. It can be great to do this as a proper full-blown radio show. I've found a few years ago this clip on YouTube, which is hilarious. I think it's called Behind the Mic, And it's a behind the scenes view of an old school radio show that people would have listened to before the time of television. And it's one of those kind of serial radio shows where there's people acting different parts and there's people in the studio creating the sound effects from scratch. Now, this behind the scenes video on YouTube is so funny because it shows you, what it looks like when you hear a group of horses galloping through the country and western, sort of scene that they're describing. And in this video, which is behind the scenes, it shows a group of men galloping along to create that sound effect and using their hands on their thighs and slapping. And it's really funny. It's a really great behind the scenes look at how sound effects are created, Foley, and how all the acting parts are done as well. So this is a great group project. You might have different roles for students, so they're acting out different parts. They may also be assigned roles in the production of the radio show itself as well. So someone might be the person directing everybody, sort of managing the project. Someone else might be in charge of sound effects. Someone else is in charge of the acting or narrating part. And someone might be in charge of the music side of things. So it's a great one for planning out in depth first and then putting it together in GarageBand or Soundtrap. Now let's talk through some level 4 advanced type projects. I'm going to start off with sampling and remixing as areas to get into. And one of the things that I love to do is to use found sounds in a composition. Now there's quite a few examples of this online which you can show to students. The thing that I've ended up putting together for the members of my online community is a found sound challenge where students will take one object, one item perhaps, or even a category of items. So it could be like stationery products, or it could be a single item like a chair. I've done an example with a wine glass. I wouldn't suggest that's what students are going to use, but that was what I had at hand at the time. Funnily enough, you could get them to choose a desk or something that's easy to get hold of in the classroom. And they need to create a variety of sounds from that one single object. So they can produce the sounds by hitting or tapping or scraping the object. And what they can do is record each individual sound, and they become short samples which can be used later on. So once you've gathered these short audio samples, you can then put them together in some kind of composition. So one simple approach is to just simply use them in a rhythmic way. So you might just use them rhythmically. A lower sound you might sort of match up or think of it like a kick drum sound and place that in the bar where the kick drum would fall. You can find other sounds to make other rhythmic patterns in a similar way. You can also use tuned musical examples, even with found sounds. There are some times where you can actually kind of run an effect on the sound to give it a pitch of some sort, so a note, and you can then create something musical out of them. There are some fantastic examples of this on a YouTube channel. The creator is called Andrew Huang, and he has a fantastic array of found sound videos. His video production is also really high quality, so you can see all the different things that he's using in the found sound compositions that he makes. And he uses things like, there's one which is a car tire. There's one where he's at the dentist and there's sounds from that. There's so many of them. There's one where he uses a stack of jeans, like denim jeans, and many, many other ones. A recent one had tech products, so old school kind of tech products like, Game Boys and Walkmans and so on. Do go and check out those. They're a great inspiration, a great thing to show students to start off with. And then when they're doing that sort of project, you need to keep it really simple. So I would just choose one tiny aspect, just limit them to perhaps recording 5 different sounds using their object, and then they're going to put those together in some sort of rhythmic pattern. That might be all that you do. If you're working with older students and you've got more class time, it can get more in depth, and the examples that you can see on YouTube take a lot longer than just a couple of lessons to do. Now, another project that I've put together in my online community uses music or audio samples, and then you take those and make them into something new. So one of the examples that I've done is to use the NASA sound samples. NASA released a whole series, or have available a whole series of audio sound samples from things like outer space or in the control room, or sounds of the astronauts speaking and so on. And they're all available, public domain or Creative Commons, one or the other, available for anyone to use in any way they like. So what you can do is download a collection of these sounds, or students can download them, and then they can chop them up, they can re-pitch them, they can change them in certain ways, they can add effects to them, and again, in a similar way to the first example, they can put them together in a musical way. So they're going to create something musical out of the space sounds. Now you can do this with lots of different audio samples. It doesn't have to be the space ones, it could be anything. You can take audio stems that you might find online and download those, and they can use those in their musical projects to create something new. Now, I highly recommend finding legal options for these. I've spoken about this in a number of other podcast episodes and on my website. There are places that you can go to find Creative Commons or public domain stems and audio samples that students can use in their works. Another really simple thing, and a really good one at this level, is to take a MIDI file of some sort and transform it in a certain way. Now, I have been doing something like this in my workshops for some time, but Dr. Scott Watson, who I've had on the show before, actually talks about his process for doing this project in his book, which I'll link to in the show notes. He has a book which has a whole series of music tech projects and basically a whole curriculum. And one of his projects is called New Clothes for an Old Tune, and I hope that I've remembered that correctly. But basically in that one, he suggests taking a classical piece, a MIDI file of a classical piece, and you can import that into Soundtrap or into GarageBand and then transform it in some way to make it completely different. So if, for instance, you imported a Mozart string quartet as an example, you might change the sound of the violin one part to something completely different. Maybe that becomes an electric guitar, maybe it becomes a trumpet, maybe it becomes a clarinet, and you can go through and do things like add a drum track and basically transform the piece so it sounds quite different. It can be good to take parts of the piece and use them in different sections and do a little bit of like remixing there as well. So that's a great way to tackle arranging and composing all at once in a way. It's really great to just transform those MIDI files and end up with something quite different. Now, at this later stage, other projects that you might want to do include video game composition and also film scoring. And these are two things which I really love at this sort of advanced level. However, I have done both of those with quite young students too. Film scoring I've done with grade 5s all the way through to year 12 students, and I've taken the same approach with all of those different year levels, but just had different outcome expectations from the different age groups. So with video game composition and with film scoring, there's a lot of similarities with what you'll cover from a musical standpoint in terms of creating mood music and representing characters or times or places with musical motifs and creating some kind of mood that engages the listener or the watcher of the game or the film. It's really fantastic with the film scoring because you are actually combining and synchronizing visuals with sound, and this adds another element to what you're doing. Now, I am going to say that Soundtrap, this is not possible in Soundtrap, not yet anyway, where you are able to import a video directly into the program and do the film scoring that way. You can, however, do that in GarageBand. You can import your film into GarageBand, and students can compose alongside while they see the film playing. Now, I love this thing because it can be quite a short project or it can be quite in-depth project, and it allows you to combine things like matching up sound effects to what's going on the screen and then creating some mood music to go along with it, and creating that sense of suspense or happiness or creating the mood of the place that the people are in. Really great projects. It's very easy to do in a simple way, and it's a really great one for extending and expanding and making it much more advanced. Now, if you are using Soundtrap and you can't import the video, it's not like everything's lost. You can still do a film score and composition project with students. It's just that you don't have the benefit of directly synchronizing the two things together. So if, for instance, you wanted to match up the door slamming sound that you have in your project with the door slam that you can see in the film clip, that's hard to do in Soundtrap. Very difficult. Very easy to do in GarageBand because you can perfectly line up those two things. So in Soundtrap, the way I would approach it is to just create a mood piece for a short clip that you're working with. So you might take a clip and you make a note of how long it is. So it might be 1 minute and 10 seconds long. And then in Soundtrap, you could create mood music to go along with it. Perhaps it's a car chase scene, for instance. So students can take that. In Soundtrap, they'll create their car chase music to go along with it. And then at the end of that, they can export what they've created as an audio file or an MP3 file. And then you can synchronize the two in separate video editing software. So you would take that, the original film clip, and marry the two together in your video editing software. So you can still do it. It's not quite as detailed as doing it in GarageBand, but I think it's still a great approach to take. Video game composition also is a fantastic project for students. And again, you're talking about creating mood and place and time, creating that sense of suspense or that something bad's going to happen. All of those things can happen with video game composition too. The difference here is that with video games, the player is kind of the one a little bit in control of what happens with the music, as in when it changes and, when the music changes because of what's happening in the game itself. So you could either approach video game composition as a standalone thing where you're just getting students to create a mood type music piece to go along with a game that they can think of in their head, or you could take the approach where they're actually going to match up what they're composing to video game footage. And again, this is a great, if you've got the time and perhaps another teacher to work with, this could be a great cross-curricular activity where there might be some students actually creating their own games as part of what they're doing in another class, and the music students could create the soundtrack to go along with what the other students are creating. So fantastic projects for older students. But as I said, it's really easy to adapt and differentiate with all of the projects that I've mentioned. It's very easy if you've got students that are fast, who move quickly through things, or who are musically more advanced in your class. They can do things like adding another track on top of what they've already got. They could add a harmony part to what they've done. They could compose a melody if there already isn't already one there. They could add a new section onto the end. They could create custom instrument sounds by changing the tone, the settings of that instrument. And you can even get advanced students to teach the class, the rest of the class, something that they've learnt or discovered along the way. For students that need things a little bit more basic, because perhaps they're not as advanced, you can do things like encourage them to record at a very slow tempo instead of at the tempo that the piece is going to be in the end. You can temporarily slow down the tempo to do the recording and then put it back up to the original tempo when you're finished. You can perhaps even allow them to use instruments. Sometimes you can bring up an instrument in a software program which has limited scale options. So the notes of that instrument might be limited to the notes of the blues scale or the pentatonic scale. The advanced students can have access to the entire keyboard and need to know the scale and pick out the notes. But the students that are not as advanced could have the limited scale options and just work with those instead. Now, I hope that gives you some ideas, particularly if you're starting out with Soundtrap or GarageBand, or even if you've had them for some time but you're looking for some new things to do with them. Those are all things that I've found really lots of fun, truly lots of fun to do. I still enjoy doing those projects myself, even though I've done them lots and lots of times. And the people I'm working with always find them a lot of fun too. Really great things for tying in musical outcomes and tech skills at the same time. Now, if you're already a member of the Midnight Music community, you will have access to pretty much all of the things I've described in these 2 episodes. There are detailed instructions and walkthrough videos for all of the lessons and projects, and there's downloadable lesson plans and checklists and so on to go with them as well. If you're not a member, there are a couple of free lessons that you can download, which I'll link to in the show notes. And if you're not a member and you'd like to be one, I'd love you to come and join us and contribute to the discussion that we have in there about different ideas and take advantage of the lessons that are in there as well. There's a special offer for podcast listeners at midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. It would be great to see you in there. So a quick recap from both of these episodes. First of all, start really simple. That's really a top tip that I can give. Use templates to cut to the chase where you want to or where you need to. So if you're short on time, send a template out to the students and use that. Do value the tech skills that are learnt early on in the piece. So in those early projects, the students are learning lots of tech skills, and that's going to be beneficial down the track. So don't worry if you don't get a lot achieved musically. Value those tech skills that they have picked up by doing some of the easier projects. And then the next tip is to build up difficulty of projects over time and include adaptations for different levels of ability. And lastly, I'm going to recap that golden rule, and I really hope you remember what it is from the previous episode, which is to do the entire project yourself from start and to absolute finish before you do it with the students. If there's one thing that I hope you remember from this episode or both of these episodes, I hope that that's the one. That's the one that's helped me the most over the years, and I continue to use it even today. Now that's it for today's show. If you'd like more help using technology, I'd love you to come and join me inside the Midnight Music community. It's my online space for music teachers to learn more about technology through online courses and video tutorials, lesson plans, tips, and through personalised support. For more information about the community and a special offer for podcast listeners, go to midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. The Music Tech Teacher podcast is hosted by me, Katie Wardrobe. You can find more information and links from today's episode at midnightmusic.com.au/43. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.